And as the guys leave us, we're going to go straight into our second panel discussion of the afternoon. Our second panel discussion being the best practice cybersecurity incident response plans. Again, if you're unable to call the guards and you have to do it yourself, what should that doing of it consist of? And our moderator for our panel, will you please welcome Paul Hayes.
Thanks very much, Anton. You're a hard act to follow. Not as hard for our panelists to follow the FBI, ex-NSA, and although Dairygold, I think, will follow Kerry Group ably, I would imagine. You guys actually make Dairygold, right? It's complicated. They have a complicated.
We don't make Dairygold.
Yeah. Relationship status complicated on Facebook. I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage to discuss the actual practical steps that you can take as CIOs and CISOs. Brian Padden from, where's he from again? Not Kerry Group, Dairygold. Thank God. Martin Leahy from Abtran, who we've heard from earlier. In a last-minute super substitution, we have Jamie Cowper from IBM, Director of EMEA Marketing, and last but not least, Anne Sloane from Stryker. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to sit down now and learn for the next half an hour. I might start nearest to me here, Jamie, if that's okay. You were telling me people are getting better at planning for these attacks, but we're not there yet. What's the view?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've done recently, we were involved in a research project with the Panelists Institute, where they looked at the state of cyber resilience across a number of countries in the world, and the UK was one of them. And one of the questions they asked people was, do you have a cybersecurity incident response plan? And more specifically, one that's deployed and rolled out across the organisation. And what we found, and this is the second year for some of the countries, in the UK, for example, there's still 20% of organisations that have no plan at all that are responding to a survey in this area, certainly. But that figure's gone down from 40% year on year, so there is room, so it's definitely trending the right way. What we also saw, though, that only, I think, less than 30% of companies have actually a plan that was deployed consistently. So there's lots of, everyone's on that kind of process, maybe it's departmental, maybe it's specifically around certain threat actors. And the other thing that's worth calling out is of those people who said they had a plan, only 17% of them had actually tested it more than once in the last 12 months. So it's great they have a plan, but if you're not living it and modifying it and it's not dynamic, then is it going to be ready at the point you need it to be?
Martin, as you outlined earlier, you had a plan and then you had an incident. How has that changed forward planning for you at Abtran? Yeah,
it's a good point because most businesses have an incident response plan, and cybersecurity attack can be classed as an incident. So can the loss of a server, so can the loss of a 20% network. Don't, but nobody in this room obviously has no plan. Hands up if you've no plan. No, I think I'm the only one without a plan. Sorry, Martin. No one's going to admit to that. Sure. But you're right. So every time you have an incident, your plan gets better. Every time you have an incident, your team gets better. Your roles and so forth become clearer. And I mean, specifically the question you asked about how did our event last year improve our plan? I think it had kind of some clear impacts in that we became better at security, we became better at prevention and so forth. But I think the team strength was vastly increased. There was a huge increase in trust between the people involved because we had no choice. It was about 5 days. We were just on rolling shifts, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. You had to trust the people you were handing over to in the middle of the night and so forth. So that's kind of an intangible strength. It kind of gets back to what I was talking about this morning as well. There is great strength in the community, not just inside the four walls of the company, but outside as well. And I mean, I give the example of how Cloudflare got fixed by somebody else, and so that's definitely a benefit. How could we inculcate more of that? Are there open forums where people can be supportive, or is it about personal relationships? Yeah, I mean, there's incident management training, the straight ITIL stuff. But, I mean, I'd be heavily involved in IT at Cork, which is where we're based, which is a body of like-minded professionals, and there's seminars run on a regular basis. And, that's the type of forum where you can contrast and compare how you're getting on. Sounds like we need a kind of a system like the criminals have, the lads were talking about, where we can rate each other as we go. A slightly lighter dark web, maybe. Well, yeah.
Kamir, you were talking to me as well about, the way down the future stuff that you need to start looking at, traps and prisons and everything else that's going to come down the line. What's the longer term? What's the 18 to 24 month, that you think is that people need to start looking and putting on their radar now?
Well, we saw a lot of it this morning. I learned a lot this morning myself, and I took a photograph of the 2017 predictions, I can tell you. I think businesses that are not directly involved in technology or that are not direct security companies are always going to be following. We're always going to be a year or two behind. What we put up a year ago is a year out of date now. We need to move forward with that. But at the same time, you can't irrationally rush into a new area just because you heard a guy at a conference talking about it who happened to, be in a certain niche area. So, I mean, clearly, the trapping, the prisoner approach, that kind of thing is becoming stronger. But if you're thinking about the skills you're going to need to get involved in that, that's not something that ordinary decent businesses are going to get involved in that quickly. So I think, artificial intelligence at the back end of the seam, I think that's the next big push, and it's going to become much more widespread over the coming 12, 18 months.
And I see you nodding in agreement there. Now, unlike our esteemed colleague from Dairygold who does put things in my body every day, you guys put more important things in my body from a medical devices point of view. So I'm very interested in terms of the plans you have. Maybe you'll tell us a little bit about how that works and what you put inside me, if that's not too rude a question.
Of course, yeah, of course. So I won't do any plugging for Stryker, but I suppose what we found, and I've worked with Stryker for about 15 years now, and I've seen the development, particularly in our manufacturing space, where you had machines that were standalone machines in the past, but now practically every machine that gets purchased, right, is a connected device, right? So obviously that brings with it a lot of exposure because you've got data that comes off those machines. A lot of it, we heard earlier about the unstructured nature of data and threats to unstructured data. So that exposes, I suppose, the company significantly. And we also find, particularly in the manufacturing space, a lot of our equipment vendors would not bring their software up to date, right? So with the current operating system, Windows 7, etc. So that actually provides a bigger threat as well. So obviously a standard virus, won't protect them, right? So I think that's another threat that we see. So you've got to work harder to, I suppose, protect your external perimeter, right? And certainly now, threats are widespread. You get hit sort of almost on a daily basis. So you have to be, I think, far more proactive and really hit an incident when it occurs. Maybe to build on Martin's point as well, I think the whole, and what we saw earlier with Watson, and I think that whole, I probably call it predictive analytics, right? And using the data that's out there, that huge processing power that's out there, to really be able to protect you as well as the firewalls on the perimeter, etc.
Brian, I mean, you're, I suppose, in what we call a high volume, low margin business, probably not that low margin, but how do you plan that's different perhaps from some of the other companies that are here today?
Not to any great degree differently, to be honest with you. I think there's a commonality in this, and there's lots of frameworks out there obviously you can use, but at the end of the day, I suppose a lot of it comes back to common sense. And I suppose I was reading something the other day, and I suppose one of the things about being on a panel is don't be on chair 4, because everyone else would have used what you were going to say in advance, but I'll think of something else. No, but it was a survey from PricewaterhouseCoopers. It was a cybercrime survey. And basically, to the point that Jay made, they said that 37% of companies didn't have a plan. Now, obviously, it depends on your sample set and so on, but there's quite a number of organizations, none of them in this room, I'm sure, because we're all here today, so we know about this, will be in that boat. But I suppose more pressingly, the stat they had was that almost 50% of board members had never even asked what their organization's cybersecurity awareness was. So, I mean, there is an element, I think, for all of us of almost like whistling past the graveyard. There's an element of people thinking it'll never happen to them. And, as plenty of people can attest to, it has. And, to Martin's point, and we would be of the same mind, it's fine to have a plan. And very often, in IT, we'll put a plan together because the auditors have asked us to or because it's the thing to do. And I noticed coming up the stairs, there's a whole bunch of nervous-looking people getting ready for their ACCA exams. So I was just thinking what the world needs, more accountants. But anyway, we're asked to do these things and we do them, but I think it's only when, you test it and rigorously that you start to understand the flaws and people, get more familiar with what they're supposed to do. And I suppose if I could use an analogy that struck me recently, I was looking at a video on YouTube, and it's not to belittle something that was an extreme tragedy. The Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986, which you'll all be familiar with, which tragically exploded with loss of life. But there's a video on YouTube, which is probably worth 10 minutes of your time, to use an analogy about planning and kind of crisis management. And obviously, again, I'm not equating, as bad and all as a cybersecurity attack is and can be to something like that. But if you look at that, what you can see is a team in action, and clearly a team that have practiced their plan. So when you watch the video, the flight director, Jay Green, it shows a shot of, essentially the liftoff, and it's obviously a success. And then within a minute, you see the iconic pictures, I suppose, of Challenger exploding. And, for all of us in our roles and, planning for this, the cybersecurity aspects, what do you do then? I mean, that team basically, firstly, the learning there is what they'd seen on the screen had actually obviously happened, but they didn't then start acting on what they'd seen. What they did was they went through their data. So he asked for all of the stations to report back to him as to what they were getting, macabre things, I suppose, such as the life support systems from the astronauts. And only when all of those were reading, not sending any more information, did they get a response from the RSA, which is the remote surveillance area out in the pad, to say that they confirmed that the vehicle had exploded. And from that point on, so they had kind of one plan to confirm that this was happening. And then they went into another plan, which is essentially to say, what do we do next, the contingency. So he told all the operators that the contingency plan was now in effect, so they moved to another plan. And I suppose it's interesting because it all comes down to the detail. That you could then see his assistant to his left get up and do something. And I suppose that was the first thing we learned, that the first part of the plan, and can anyone guess what the first part of the plan was? It was essentially to lock the door. And the key was that they didn't want other people who weren't familiar with the plan to come in and start dictating what needed to be done. And there's an analogy or lesson there for all of us, because when you go back to Martin's point about the planning and bringing people on board, it's not only our teams that need to be aware of what happens in these situations, it's also the key stakeholders, the chief executive, the main business drivers. You need to consult with them up front as to whether they need to be involved in that. But if they don't, if they shouldn't be there and they've decided they shouldn't be there, they have to know what's happening, because what you don't need in a very stressful situation is a whole host of other very well-meaning people and very invested people who need to know what's going on top of you, telling you what you should have done, what you should be doing next, where you went wrong, and so on. But if they are not there, then they need to be communicated with properly. So I think there's an analogy there about making sure you've got the right people.
It's interesting what you came up with and the ever-increasing amount of accountants that are being churned out downstairs. Cost and the cost-benefit analysis of all of this, because perhaps it isn't taken seriously to the point that it may now be because of GDPR and the fines directly connected and the fact that people have to, marry the person with the most cigarettes in the cell next to them if they get this wrong now. I'm too pretty for jail. So where's that going to go? And then what's an acceptable level of cost? Is there such a thing within cybersecurity planning, that there's an acceptable level of losses before we move to another stage of investment? Or is it a sum-zero game, I guess, is the very unclear question I'm asking all of you.
Yeah,
You have to ask Watson that one, because I don't know what to say.
Yeah. We'll get back to Watson at the end. We've got a zinger for Watson.
Yeah. I suppose, by the way, one thing about, for every extra accountant, there's extra use of Excel, which means there's extra weaknesses up in the cloud and so forth, just so everybody knows.
Always a silver lining.
Yeah, a lot of weaknesses have been created downstairs today.
And no one will ever kill Excel.
And vulnerabilities and exposures. Look, I think it depends on your product, and I think a lot of it depends on how would your product be impacted by a cyber attack. If you're in a manufacturing situation and a particular batch might be wiped out by a cyber attack, let's say you lose all the track and trace traceability information about a batch, you might say, you know what, happens once a year, costs a couple of $100,000, compared to the $5 million it would cost to protect against it, we're happy to take the hit. I know in our own situation in Abtran, absolutely no way we could indulge in that type of conversation, because our ability to maintain data integrity and to protect data and also to maintain confidentiality is absolutely supreme. If even for a second that's in question, then we don't have a business anymore. So there's no question with us is that there's almost no limit to what we would lose. So, you know, our approach to spend obviously has to be prudent, but we have to realize how high the stakes are. And I think that's what you have to do. You have to look at what happens to me if I get attacked. Can I continue my business, as well as the actual monetary impact of a single given attack, you know?
What's your view on that? I mean, is it an all or nothing game mostly, or are there levels of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the temptation is always to focus on the enormous data breaches, which are, of course, not the security incidents that most companies are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So it's about understanding, obviously the risk to the business is critical. What is the data? Where is it? How is it protected? You know, how exposed is it? But also, what is the volume of incidents? I think one of the big challenges for companies is understanding just, how much, what is the volume? What is the nature of the incidents? Where are they coming from? What they should worry about? You can't stop everything, clearly. I mean, that's not practical. So it's about the whole concept of the cyber resilience is how do you maintain the operations you need to in the event of being under attack, and so what is the process? And then you can start thinking, well, what is it going to cost us to defend against this particular vector versus something else? It is complicated, that's the reality, but it's getting that sense of everything that's out there coming into your business and what's important to yours is where you have to start.
Brian, you want to say?
No, I suppose it's like paying for insurance. You know, it's like the business doesn't really want to pay for insurance, but they know they have to.
Yeah, but I guess the question is the premium. Because there are people here at all levels, I would imagine. Maybe I could phrase it this way. What's the minimum level of prevention? What are the minimum levels you need to be doing before you ramp up? Over lunch there, Henk said to a group of about 5 people, so, I mean, should you always cut off command and control at an early stage, or does that give the giveaway? And I saw 5 people looking at their shoes going, I don't think I operate at that level. I think it might have been just the American accent intimidated. But, like, what's the minimum people here today should take away if they don't have a sophisticated level of, response plan?
I think you need the tools, right? You definitely have to invest in the tools, because otherwise, you're maybe a small IT department, or you've got a couple of people working when an attack comes in, right? And it's very difficult. We heard about the timing. Timing is key when something happens, right? So you absolutely have to invest in the tools, but I think you also need to make your people smarter, right? Your IT organization smarter, so they can react quickly. I think we talked about the processes, having a strong process. It's hard to quantify cost, and sometimes it's very difficult to put the business case together, because you hear it all the time. People who want your business, you talk about disaster recovery, and then you give the cost for having a 24/7 fully available system, and they'll come back and say, but that won't happen very often, right? So it's that game of chess, I suppose, in many ways. But I think in most organizations now, information is a critical asset, right? It has become a critical asset. And the threat, if something happens within your environment, your data goes, your intellectual property could get stolen, right? So every organization has to go and figure out what that threshold is, I think. But invest in the tools, invest in their people, and really have a solid plan and be able to react.
Very good.
If I come back to the Poneman report that was published, one of the things it did ask was, what drives budget investment for security, and the two biggest ones were system availability, uptime, being able to keep running, and the other one was compliance. And GDPR was clearly called out as something that people were using, at least as a lever for having a conversation with senior execs on the board about, it changes the risk conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, some of this is politics, not just tech, isn't it?
Sure.
It's where ideally should this role be positioned, and therefore the activities of it, and where should it report into? How does it work in your organizations?
I think just to take the previous point, I mean, this is essentially an investment conversation, much like every other one. So the first thing you have to be is have the kind of the credibility with the various people that you do know what you're talking about, and that you're able to give them the information they need. But I think what's key to this particular problem, to use this insurance analogy, is you have to show and not tell. Like, get your senior team into a kind of a crisis management exercise, and when they actually get to see the whites of the eyes of this kind of situation, it kind of focuses the mind and speak their language. Like, think of a scenario that could happen to you, and then start talking about that. And very often what you find, because we've had this experience, there's the denial. It's like, well, that couldn't happen to us. Why would anyone? And even just the notion that, okay, you may not have the most sexy data in the world, but to some people out there, that data is a commodity. They may not want to do anything with it, but they'll put it on the equivalent of eBay and leave it there for someone else to take. And you've been hacked. So it's getting to understand that the risk is pervasive, but also having the credibility with them over other engagements for them to take you seriously. And I mean, sometimes IT people bemoan the fact that, IT's brand may not be at the highest level. Someone once said to me, it's like sometimes in IT, if you were walking on water, they'd say, oh, look, he can't swim. It's kind of a constant evolution, a constant battle to be up there. But that's on us to make sure that happens, because as someone else mentioned earlier today, it comes back to us at the end of the day, the responsibility.
Yeah, how do you think the brand will evolve of the IT to cybersecurity to, because there is an element of the importance within the organization. What's some of the new language that's coming out and the new positioning?
Yeah, I suppose in many ways, I think one of the sins of the past from IT organizations is we talk technology, right? This is a real and present threat to business, right? And I think everybody can figure that out. That's telling people here how to suck eggs, right? But I think we have to take that brand and talk about the business and the business impact, maybe through crisis management exercise, etc., right? And then I think you begin to get your business on board, right? Because we had a discussion earlier on today with some folks that are here with me, and we talked about something that occurred in our company a week or so ago. And no matter how many times you train people that don't click on a link with an email, blah blah blah. We had a situation where 100 people clicked on a link, right? No matter how many times you tell people. So we've got to get a little bit smarter about training, educating people. Maybe doing things differently, right? And I think that trying to think about that from kind of a business perspective as well, I think, to make sure that the business begins to understand what the implications of the threats, if they happen to your particular organization.
Someday we all like to believe that someday my Nigerian prince will come. It'll be real. Martin, you were mentioning AI and machine learning and everything that's coming along, and to the guy's point that you need to humanize it, is that going to drive us further away from being able to, I suppose, relate to everybody's concerns within an organization, or is this just going to be another black box that goes, give me some budget here because we're going to be able to drive things further? How do you think it's going to play out within organizations?
Well, I think that people see the power of artificial intelligence. I was talking about Watson this morning, but there's lots of others. I don't think it's going to drive people away. We were having a conversation at lunchtime about, Watson's about 7-8 years old now. So in 5 years' time, 6 years' time,
Teenager.
It'll become a teenager.
Oh, yeah.
And what happens when someone becomes a teenager? It'll start hanging out with the wrong crowd, smoking behind the bike shed and all of this sort of stuff, and will turn against its creators maybe.
Yes.
But, that's a simplistic approach, but, you're right, AI isn't always just going to be the answer. But it's going to evolve, it's going to change. 3 or 4 years ago, nobody was even thinking. You heard Dennis this morning talk, it was only after trying Watson in several other areas that they thought, hey, this could really work for security. Yeah. And those ideas are going to keep on coming. But there's no question that, one thing the hackers and malware merchants and so forth don't have is a structured, large-scale response that AI can bring.
Right.
And they don't have it yet anyway.
Is there an evil twin Watson out there somewhere being, a spectre?
No doubt, but for the moment, it's a very productive mind to seem, or seem to mine, I mean.
Yeah. It's Skynet is what we were saying, or as our kids would now know it, Ultron. Watch Iron Man. I just like to be up to date with our, when it goes rogue. There is an element though as well of, the what was I going to say? The language around how we're going to use things and where we're going to get to. Is AI? Is it just going to mean the humans in the field are still the most important. I mean, Kurt and Henk were scaring the hell out of us there. But if we go down we're always going to be scared, we're never going to do anything. We're going to be paralyzed by fear. Where should we be pitching ourselves and sorry, I say ourselves, I'm not one, only in the last half hour, but as cybersecurity specialists, where we don't want to be crying wolf all the time, but at the same time we want to show this is where the healthy threats are coming from, rather than the world is falling down, you can't do anything, because they're the two extremes, aren't they?
I think you're trying to guide humans to make the best decision and get the right information to them at the right point in time. If you look at what Watson, what a lot of the technology is doing at the moment, the threat intelligence that Hank talked about in the last panel, incident responders, security operations guys, they're trying to deal with a lot of different things. They're trying to find that needle. They're trying to make sure they're working on the right thing. And not a bunch of false positives, a bunch of stuff that doesn't turn out to be anything. How can they be pointed in the right direction, then guided as part of that process? We've had a lot of talk about skills gap, about getting people up to that higher level. So if you can help say, okay, well, this, based on the information we can see, this is a credible threat. The internal systems impacted, have serious information on them. It's the CEO's laptop, whatever it is. All that information then helps you to get different people in the case, to elevate it, to get the CISO directly involved, to make. But no one's talking about supplementing or replacing that human. I don't think anyone's comfortable with that kind of level of automation at this point. There are some tasks. I mean, I think people look at automation for things like enriching information. Let's go out and check this IP address and see if it's a known. If it's command and control center, whatever it might be, all these other things. So that thing, that's happening today. But the rest of it is about driving and enabling the human behind the computer to make that the best possible decision.
Those beeps indicate that we're now at the intelligent question portion of this evening. I'm going to open it. No, never hurts to kiss the audience's ass, in my experience. Have we got questions? We've time for about two. Straight down here at the back, in the middle.
My question, hello. My question is to Martin. As we know that there is a rapid continuous change in the world of cybersecurity every day, and as you were saying that, we need everyday plan, and then performance can get better, and after that, team strength and trustworthy people into the team. But still.
Sorry, it's quite hard to hear you.
Okay.
Could you speak into the microphone?
I can repeat my question. My question was that, as we know that there is a rapid change into the security world, and as you said that we need a trustworthy people, and maybe we need a update plan every day. So in relation to the response plan, I will just ask one thing, that except social engineering, what are the aspects which you can consider that can be compromised in the next 12 months for response side, for response plan means?
What are the main areas we need to develop response plans in the next?
What are the areas which can be compromised maybe in the next 12 months for the response plan, except social engineering?
I suppose the best response is an informed response, right? So, I mean, the best response plan is one that's able to draw on as much information as you can at any given time. So, in order to make your response effective, you're going to need to, again, I'll go back to one of the presentations this morning where they spoke about, you've got the 5-minute window, the 10-minute window, the 20-minute window. You need to have a situation where your response team can operate in the 5 to 10-minute window, which is about ensuring you have the structures in place with a strong security partner to draw that information to you very, very quickly, depending on the nature of the attack. I mean, I spoke this morning about an attack we had last year. We'd never seen anything like it before. But within 10 minutes of starting to speak to our security partners, we were able to form an accurate picture of what had happened, and we were able to dispatch individuals to go and carry out specific tasks. So I think the number one thing is you need to have a strong information store. And I think the number two thing is you need to have your people ready for this type of attack. It's no use saying, we have an incident response team, and not training them up. You need to prepare them. You need to look at use cases. You need to study what has happened elsewhere. And then when the attack comes, they're in a much better position to respond.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that might be all we... Oh, no, we have one very quick question if it's over here on the left. Well done on that question. I should have asked that at the start. That would have saved a whole half hour.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about technology across most of the day. I think there's also been a couple of people have mentioned the importance of people, the importance of process. And I suppose I'd like the panel's view in terms of what percentage of an organization's budget or their cybersecurity budget should be dedicated towards modifying the culture of the organization, modifying the organization's behavior, the people behavior, and the process vis-a-vis the tools.
Difficult one, I think, because, I suppose the nature of it means, I suppose to answer your question one way, IT can't change the culture, essentially. The culture is something that's driven by leadership, by vision, by purpose, right from the very, very top and then across the organization. So I think IT has its role to play, certainly in education, in the use of tools and technology. Some of the elements we talked about with the prevention of attacks through email, for example, IT can prevent a lot of those, but the challenge through technology, because I think that's the key. You can only educate users to a certain extent. You need to try and prevent things from happening as well, without stopping them from working, because that's the key balance. But it's very hard to put a number on it, because I think you can certainly budget for the elements that we control, like we being as an IT, I suppose. But as regards to culture change, it has to go be across the organization, and that's the key challenge, is getting the whole organization to recognize this threat as a cultural threat, as an organizational threat, not just IT's problem. And that's the big challenge.
Yeah, that's definitely it. I don't think you can say, right, we have this money over here for cyber awareness and so forth. It just has to be in the induction. When people come into the company, we're a cyber aware company. This is the nature of our behavior. Like you train people how to walk on and off the site, what time the canteen is open, all this sort of stuff. It should be as central as that.
Brian, Anne, Martin, and Jamie, thank you.